When my 6-year-old grandson whispered that his mommy puts white powder in his daddy's coffee every morning, I thought he was just being silly. Kids say strange things sometimes. But when I saw my son collapse right in front of me, I knew it wasn't a game. It was real, and it was deadly. My name is Helen Ward. I'm 62 years old, and I'm a grandmother who thought she'd seen everything. But nothing could have prepared me for what my grandson told me that morning, or for what would happen minutes later in my own kitchen. Before I tell you how that moment changed our lives forever, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. This story will stay with you. Life in our small Ohio town is quiet. I live in a little brick house with a garden full of roses and a white porch swing my son built for me years ago. My days usually start early with coffee, soft music, and the sound of birds outside the window. I'm retired now after 30 years as a nurse, so I spend most of my time with my grandson, Ethan. Ethan is 6, full of energy, and always curious. He loves drawing dinosaurs and telling stories about superheroes. Every morning, his parents drop him off before work. My son, Daniel, works in construction, and his wife, Rachel, is a real estate agent. They look like a picture-perfect family. At least, that's what I believed. For years, I thought Rachel was sweet. She always had a polite smile, brought flowers on my birthday, and made sure everyone thought they were happy. But lately, things had changed. Daniel had become pale and tired all the time. He complained about headaches, stomach pains, and said he just wasn't sleeping well. I worried, of course. "Daniel, you need to see a doctor," I told him one afternoon. He smiled faintly and said, "Mom, I'm fine. Rachel's been making these special coffees for me every morning. She says it helps me stay focused." I laughed and said, "Well, whatever she's putting in there, it's not helping much." He chuckled, but there was something off in his eyes, a kind of dullness I hadn't seen before. Rachel started visiting less often. She said she was busy showing houses, but Ethan would sometimes mention that she came home late, or that his parents argued after he went to bed. I tried not to get involved, thinking every marriage has rough patches. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Daniel was losing weight. His hands sometimes shook when he held his coffee mug. He'd rub his temples and say, "Just stress, Mom. Rachel's worried about money. I'll be fine." One Friday evening, Rachel brought Ethan over and said she needed to work overnight. I noticed how tense she looked, how tightly she gripped her purse. When she hugged Daniel goodbye, there was no warmth in it. After she left, Daniel sat on the couch, sipping his coffee, staring at nothing. "Are you sure you're okay, honey?" I asked. He nodded, weakly. "Yeah, just tired. I'll go to bed early tonight." As he went upstairs, I felt an unease I couldn't name. I didn't know that the next morning, Ethan would whisper something that would tear my world apart and make me question everything I thought I knew about my own family. The next morning started like any other Saturday. The sun was coming through the kitchen curtains. The smell of toast filled the air, and Ethan sat at the table coloring. I remember humming a song from the radio while washing the dishes. It was one of those simple, peaceful moments that make you feel like life is finally calm. I didn't know that peace was about to end. Ethan had been quiet that morning. Usually, he would talk about cartoons or ask for pancakes. But that day, he was focused on his crayons, pressing hard into the paper. His little eyebrows were pulled together, and I could tell something was bothering him. I walked over and knelt beside him. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked. He looked up at me, his voice barely a whisper. "Grandma, Mommy puts white powder in Daddy's coffee every morning." I froze. I didn't understand what he meant. "What kind of white powder, honey?" He shrugged, still looking down. "I don't know. She says it helps him sleep, but she told me not to tell. She said if I tell, she'll send me away." My heart started pounding. I tried to keep my face calm, not wanting to scare him, but inside, I felt cold all over. I asked softly, "When did she start doing that?" He thought for a moment and said, "A long time, maybe before Christmas." His voice cracked a little. "Grandma, am I bad for telling you?" I hugged him tight and said, "No, baby, you did the right thing." But my mind was racing. Was it possible? Could Rachel really be giving Daniel something dangerous? Or was it some kind of vitamin or supplement? I wanted to believe there was an innocent reason, but something deep inside me screamed that there wasn't. After I got Ethan settled with his toys, I went to the kitchen and looked around. The coffee machine was still warm from that morning. I opened the cabinet above it where Rachel usually kept things when she made coffee. There were sugar packets, tea bags, and next to them, a small blue jar I hadn't noticed before. The label had been scratched off. When I opened it, a fine white powder clung to the lid. It didn't smell like sugar. My hands shook as I closed it. My stomach turned. I wanted to call Daniel right then and tell him to stop drinking whatever Rachel gave him. But I didn't want to sound crazy. What if I was wrong? What if I destroyed their marriage over a misunderstanding? All day I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept remembering the way Daniel's hands trembled when he lifted his cup, how pale he looked, how often he said he felt sick. Every sign I'd ignored came rushing back like a wave. The nurse in me started connecting pieces I didn't want to see. That evening, Rachel came to pick Ethan up. She looked beautiful as always, hair perfectly curled, wearing a neat white blouse. But when I looked closer, I saw the tightness in her smile, the impatience in her eyes. She asked casually, "Did Ethan behave?" "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "He was wonderful." She nodded and glanced toward the counter. Her gaze stopped on the blue jar. For just a second, her face changed. Her eyes flashed with something sharp, almost like panic. Then she smiled again and said, "You know, Daniel can't function without his morning coffee. I should start buying it in bulk." Her tone was light, but my chest felt tight. I wanted to grab that jar and throw it away, but I stayed quiet. After she left, I called Daniel. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding tired as usual. "Daniel, sweetheart," I said carefully, "have you ever looked at what Rachel puts in your coffee?" He laughed weakly. "Mom, are you serious? It's probably creamer or something. You're worrying too much." I wanted to push, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He was too trusting, too in love, to believe anything bad about his wife. I decided that the next morning, I'd come over early. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel lying pale and still, and Rachel standing over him with that calm smile. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the dread wouldn't leave. When morning came, I drove to their house before sunrise. The kitchen light was on. I stood in the doorway and watched Rachel at the counter. She stirred something into a steaming cup, her movements smooth and practiced. When she turned and saw me, she startled slightly, then smiled. "Helen, you're up early. I thought I'd help with breakfast," I said, forcing a steady voice. She hesitated for half a second before handing the cup toward Daniel. My heart hammered in my chest. Everything in me screamed to stop him from drinking it. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. That was the moment everything changed. Daniel sat at the kitchen table that morning, rubbing his temples and yawning. He looked exhausted, his skin pale against the dark blue of his work shirt. The faint circles under his eyes made him look years older. I stood near the counter pretending to tidy up, but my eyes were fixed on the cup of coffee Rachel had just prepared. The rich smell filled the air, but all I could think about was that white powder swirling somewhere in that dark liquid. Rachel stood by the sink, her back turned to me as she wiped her hands with a towel. "He's been so drained lately," she said lightly, her voice calm but distant. "This will help him wake up." I tried to keep my tone steady. "What exactly do you put in it?" She glanced over her shoulder and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, just some supplements. Nothing serious." Then she picked up the cup and placed it in front of Daniel. "Drink up before it gets cold." Daniel smiled weakly. "Thanks, babe." He lifted the cup, unaware that I was holding my breath, every nerve in my body tense. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. In that second, I had to make a choice. If I was wrong, I would embarrass myself and ruin whatever was left of their marriage. But if I was right and I stayed silent, I might watch my son die right there in front of me. I didn't think. I acted. As Daniel brought the cup to his lips, I lunged forward and knocked it from his hand. The cup shattered on the floor, hot coffee splattering across the tiles. The room went silent. Daniel jumped back, startled. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Mom, what the hell?" Daniel snapped, pushing his chair back. I could barely speak. My hands were shaking, my voice trembling. "Don't drink that. Please, Daniel, just don't." Rachel stared at me, her face pale, her jaw tight. "What are you talking about?" she said sharply. "You've lost your mind." "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice rising. "Ethan told me. He told me you've been putting something in his father's coffee." "I saw the jar, Rachel. What is in it?" For a moment, the kitchen was filled with only the sound of the broken cup dripping onto the floor. Rachel's expression hardened. "You're insane," she hissed. "That's ridiculous." Daniel stood up, confused and angry. "Mom, you can't just accuse her of something like that." He turned toward Rachel, but his words began to slur. His knees buckled. He tried to steady himself on the table, but his body swayed like he couldn't find his balance. My heart dropped. "Daniel!" I rushed forward as he collapsed, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. His eyes rolled back, his skin turning ashen. Rachel screamed, "Oh my God, Daniel!" and dropped to her knees, pretending to shake him awake. But I saw it, the flicker of panic that wasn't grief. It was fear, real. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "My son collapsed. He's not breathing right. Please send an ambulance to 224 Ridgewood Lane." The dispatcher's calm voice tried to keep me grounded, but my mind was spinning. Years of being a nurse kicked in automatically. I tilted Daniel's head back, checked his pulse, and began chest compressions. His breathing was shallow, weak. Rachel stood frozen beside me, her hands gripping her hair. "What's happening to him?" she cried, but there was something hollow in her voice. I glanced up and she looked terrified, not for Daniel, but for herself. I shouted, "Get me a towel, call the neighbors, do something." She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the floor, her body trembling. Within minutes, I heard sirens approaching. Ethan had come downstairs, tears streaming down his little face. "Grandma, what's wrong with Daddy?" he cried, clutching my arm. "It's okay, baby," I said, forcing myself to sound calm, though my hands were covered in Daniel's spilled coffee. "Daddy's going to be okay." The paramedics rushed in, taking over, their voices firm and fast. I backed away, holding Ethan close. Rachel tried to follow as they lifted Daniel onto the stretcher, but one of the paramedics stopped her. They'd seen the same thing I did, the empty coffee cup, the residue on the counter, the panic written across her face. As they carried Daniel out, Rachel turned to me, her voice low and trembling. "You shouldn't have done that." For a moment, our eyes met. There was no more pretending, no fake sweetness, only cold hatred. She knew the truth was coming for her. I held Ethan tighter as the ambulance doors closed. The sound of the siren faded down the street, leaving the house in heavy silence. I could still smell the bitterness of the coffee on the floor. Inside me, a storm was building. Fear, guilt, anger, and something else I couldn't name. I'd saved my son's life, but at the same time, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. That was the moment I understood. Rachel wasn't just dangerous. She was desperate, and desperate people don't stop when they're caught. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. The moment we arrived, doctors and nurses surrounded Daniel's stretcher, calling out medical terms I hadn't heard in years. I stood frozen at the emergency room entrance, clutching Ethan's hand so tightly, his little fingers trembled in mine. Rachel stood a few feet away, her mascara streaked from tears, her breathing sharp and shallow. I watched her, not as a mother-in-law, but as a nurse who'd seen too many faces of guilt in her lifetime. She didn't look heartbroken. She looked terrified of being found out. After what felt like hours, a doctor finally came out. His expression was serious, his tone clipped. "Your son is in critical condition. We're stabilizing him, but his system shows signs of heavy metal poisoning. It looks like arsenic." My world tilted. I had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made my knees weaken. I steadied myself on the wall. Rachel gasped softly, putting a hand over her mouth. Arsenic? That's insane. He must have eaten something bad. The doctor looked at her, unimpressed. We'll be running more tests. For now, we need to know everything he's eaten or drunk recently. Rachel's voice shook. I make his meals. I take care of him. Are you saying this is my fault? Her words sounded defensive, almost rehearsed. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. The next few days were a blur of waiting rooms, coffee cups, and sleepless nights. Daniel lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, pale and still. I held his hand every day, whispering prayers under my breath. Sometimes he would stir slightly, muttering something I couldn't understand. Rachel visited. Less often after the police showed up to ask questions. 2 detectives came, a tall man named Detective Harper and a younger woman named Detective Cruz. They spoke to me privately, asking about Daniel's health, his habits, and the morning of his collapse. When they asked about the coffee, my heart pounded, but I told them everything. Ethan's words, the white powder, the blue jar. Detective Harper nodded slowly. We'll need to take a look at that jar, ma'am. The following afternoon, they went to the house. I wasn't there, but when they returned, their faces told me what I already knew. They'd found it. The blue jar under the sink. Inside was arsenic, mixed with sugar to disguise it. When the detectives brought Rachel in for questioning, she tried to play the role of a panicked wife. I don't know how that got there, she insisted. We had rats in the garage. Daniel bought poison months ago. He must have mixed it up by mistake. But Ethan, my brave little grandson, gave them the final piece of truth. A nurse overheard him talking quietly in the hospital playroom. Mommy said the white powder helps Daddy sleep longer, he said. She said Grandma would take me away if I told. When the detectives told me this, my chest tightened. I didn't want my grandson to carry that burden, but his honesty might have saved his father's life. That evening, Rachel returned to the hospital one last time. Her face was blank, her movements slow. She stood at the doorway of Daniel's room, staring at him hooked up to machines. I was sitting by his bedside, reading his chart. She spoke softly, almost to herself. I never meant for it to go this far. I turned toward her, my voice cold. You poisoned him. Every day. You could have killed him. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of guilt. They were of self-pity. You don't understand, she whispered. He was going to leave me. He said he didn't love me anymore. He was going to take Ethan and start over. I just wanted him to stay. I thought if he got sick, he'd need me again. I felt sick. You tried to make him dependent by killing him slowly? She flinched at the word, killing. It was just supposed to make him weak, not this. Before I could respond, Detective Harper appeared in the hallway behind her. Rachel Ward, he said firmly. You need to come with us. She froze, her face pale as she turned toward him. You can't take me. I didn't do anything wrong. But the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. As the officers led her away, Ethan appeared in the hallway holding a nurse's hand. His eyes widened when he saw his mother crying. Mommy, he whispered. Rachel turned back once, her face crumbling. I love you, baby, she said, but her voice cracked under the weight of her own lies. Ethan hid behind me, clutching my arm. Grandma, is Mommy in trouble? I knelt down, tears filling my eyes. Yes, sweetheart, I said softly, but you did the right thing. You helped save your daddy. That night, Daniel finally woke up. His voice was weak, his words slow, but when his eyes found mine, I knew he understood. I told him everything, the powder, Ethan's confession, the police, Rachel's arrest. He didn't cry. He just stared at the ceiling for a long time and whispered, How long? I couldn't answer. I didn't know how many months she had been doing it. I only knew that love had blinded him to danger and that trust had nearly cost him his life. As I sat there holding his hand, I realized how close I came to losing everything. The people you love the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the deepest. When the nurse came in to check his vitals, Daniel reached for Ethan's drawing taped beside the bed, a crayon picture of the 3 of us holding hands in front of a big yellow sun. He smiled faintly. We're going to be okay, Mom. And for the first time in weeks, I believed him. The weeks after Rachel's arrest felt like living in the shadow of a storm. Everything looked calm on the outside, but inside, I was still shaking. My son was alive, but fragile, both in body and spirit. Ethan, my sweet grandson, had seen too much for a 6-year-old. And me, I was trying to hold everyone together while pretending I wasn't falling apart. Daniel spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The doctors said the poison had damaged parts of his liver and nervous system, but he was lucky. If it had gone on even 1 more week, they said, it might have been too late. I visited him every day. Some days he was quiet, staring out the window, lost in thought. Other days he'd talk softly about the little things he missed, driving Ethan to school, grilling in the backyard, sitting with his coffee on the porch. The very things that had once seemed so ordinary had become precious now. Rachel tried to reach him from jail. She sent letters, begging for forgiveness, insisting she never meant to hurt anyone. Daniel refused to open them. He asked me once, "How could I not see it, Mom? How could I not know what she was doing to me?" I didn't have an answer. Love blinds people in ways that logic never can. When Daniel was finally discharged, he moved back into my house with Ethan. The first morning he was home, I watched him pour himself a cup of coffee. He hesitated before taking a sip, staring at the mug for a long time. I could see the fear in his eyes. He smiled faintly and said, "Guess it's going to take a while before I can enjoy this again." Ethan was quiet those first few days. He clung to his father and me, afraid to be out of sight. One night, I found him sitting on the floor in his pajamas, talking to his stuffed dinosaur. I crouched beside him and asked, "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" He looked up and said softly, "Mommy said not to tell, but if I didn't tell, Daddy would be gone." He hesitated, then added, "Is she mad at me?" I hugged him close, tears burning my eyes. "No, baby. She's the one who did something wrong, not you. You were brave, and you helped save your daddy's life." After that, I started taking him to a child counselor every week. He began to smile again, slowly, like the sun coming out after days of rain. Daniel started therapy too, working through the betrayal, the anger, and the guilt. Healing wasn't quick, but it was steady. Months passed, and seasons changed. The court case dragged on. Rachel's defense tried to argue mental instability, saying she suffered from depression and paranoia. But the evidence was too strong. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. When I heard the verdict, I didn't feel triumph. I felt sorrow for what she'd done, for what she'd destroyed, for how easily love had turned into something toxic. That night, Daniel sat with me on the porch swing, the same one he built years ago. The air was cool, the sky painted with stars. Ethan was asleep inside, safe. Daniel turned to me and said, "I don't think I'll ever understand it, Mom, but I'm grateful you listened to Ethan. You saved me." I shook my head. "He saved you, Daniel." I just believed him. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were crickets and the gentle creak of the swing. It was peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. For the first time, I felt like we might actually be okay. A few weeks later, I took Ethan to the park. He ran ahead, his laughter echoing through the trees. Watching him play, carefree again, filled my heart with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I realized that even after everything we'd lost, life still had beauty left to offer. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, are monsters real?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yes, sweetheart, but they don't always look scary. Sometimes they smile and say they love you. That's why we have to listen to our hearts when something feels wrong." He nodded thoughtfully and closed his eyes. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're safe now." When I went downstairs, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table flipping through old family photos. He held one up of him and Rachel on their wedding day. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't hate her. I can't, but I'll never let her hurt us again." I nodded, my throat tight. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, son. It just means letting yourself live again." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'm learning to live again." The months turned into a year. Daniel returned to work part-time. Ethan started first grade, full of life and curiosity. And I learned that sometimes heroes come in the smallest forms. A little boy with crayons and a secret too heavy for his heart. Every morning now, when I pour my coffee, I think of what could have been and what still is. I think of the strength it takes to see truth when it's hiding behind love. And I remind myself that evil doesn't always knock loudly. It sometimes whispers in the kitchen, wearing a smile. If you're still here listening, remember this. Trust your instincts, love fiercely, and protect the ones who can't protect themselves. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know your thoughts. Because stories like mine aren't just about tragedy, they're about survival, courage, and the hope that even after the darkest moments, life can still bloom again.